that this video is a result of a poll that I did earlier on my community tab. And this one is from deadmau5. He is giving a feedback to a track. See how he immediately reacts to the snare?
That's all there is. No, you know what? I like that kick. The only thing I couldn't get past is the snare. It's late. It's not that the snares and kicks don't have to match. It's not wine pairing, you it's just a little late, later than it should be. You know, the kick and the snare don't match. Dude, your little brain and your big arm doesn't match. It's not wine pairing. I like the kick sound. The kick sound is really great. But it's like the snare is a little bit late, you know, because what's happening is you're squishing it before that initial transient comes in. Why don't you just like shift it to the left, like a couple of milliseconds, really, just so you can hear the transient of the snare.
First of all, you may ask why snare is actually not on the grid. There's a good reason for that. Let's say you have a simple kick and snare. I want you to take a look to peak volume when both of them hits exactly the same time. We are peaking almost around -1 dB. This means that you don't have much headroom left. There's a simple trick that producers do, either move the snare a bit earlier or a bit later so the transients doesn't hit at exactly the same time. So if you move the snare slightly in front of the kick, so we immediately gain 2-3 dB headroom just moving the snare slightly in front of the kick. And this one is from Disclosure.
This is quite cool. So those are all sending to bus 16. Bus 16 is clap verb. It's a Valhalla bright hall setting with some pre-delay, so it goes. And then kind of interestingly, I've got a tremolo after it, which is making the reverb do 16th notes. So let me bypass this. So you hear that pre-delay going. If I take that to 0, it's gonna just crash. It's cool, but it's not as rhythmic. And then give it a little bit of tremolo, and you have this weird... I don't know, just kind of interesting. It just makes everything glue together a bit more with the cowbell sample. This is what it'd be like with no preverb. Just not as good. Reverb's such a funny one because, you know, it can add so much space, but it can also add groove if you use it in the right way. Like pre-delay, I've talked about before on reverb, is so important.
This is about limiting yourself to your favorite samples.
Generell limitiert zu sein finde ich extrem angenehm. Also nicht so eine riesen Libraries mit 8000 Kicks, sondern vielleicht eine mit 5, weil diese endlosen Möglichkeiten machen mich fertig.
I've just got like 50 kicks basically that I use. I don't really look for anything else because I've pretty much have the kicks that I want. I think it really helps because the worst thing is when you're trying to start a track and trying to find like a good kick drum and you're just like going through like 40 different sample packs, and like usually sample pack kicks are terrible. They're not good at all. So I just have these ones and I just cheat.
This one comes from Bad Snacks. Unfortunately, she's not explaining what she's doing while doing it, but I will try to help out with my commentary.
Gonna make it twice as fast.
She first renders the audio and then she creates a duplicate out of it, and the duplicate is reversed. And after that point she changes the original piano and it ends up with really this beautiful tamra. This is a very cool technique to create ethereal ambiances and used a lot in electronic dance music as well. Let me show you. And if we add the delay on top, and the same idea, we rendered the audio and reversed it. And there's a small trick that spices up even more, and the idea is adding another echo on the free time so that it can be just random. It completely blurs out the lines and a slight reverb. And to make it really ethereal, we will cut the highs and lows. And sidechain the kick. And this simple yet very effective trick is from Virtual Riot.
Recently, what I also really like doing, go and get single note samples, one shot, single notes. So I've been sorting these myself. These are all just from Splice. And you can still layer it with the Serum. I've added this whole folder of one-shot samples to the noise folders in Serum. So if I'll make like a simple plucky sound, let's just do that real quick, I can immediately add a nice splice sample on top. Montage. Let's say we made a really boring plucky sound. But then you can just go in here and be like, oh, okay, notes, bell stab, don't loop, key track. Louder. And then you immediately have a nice layer. And then already your tiny little saw plug has become a little more organic. Nice.
And I would like to add something on top of this. You can actually also add long sustained pad sounds. So the bulk of the sound actually comes from this mellow Jupiter 8 pad. So if we take off that sample sound, this is just a triangle sound, right? But once you add the Jupiter layer, it turns into a beautiful pad sound.
This is just fun, you know, just trying to make something to, you know, to move people in a club. That's literally the only thing I'm trying to do here. Not thinking about releasing, not thinking about anything, just thinking about something to make people dance with. That's the only thing. Nothing else. Zero. Nada. All. Nil.
And then in another clip, he actually illustrates how these small details can make your drums much more easier to dance to.
So that's the old groove, and then here I've like changed some of the quantize around and just like tried to get things playing together a little bit better. So I'm going to play the old groove and then it'll go into the new one. Kind of small, right? I think it makes a big difference. It's not just the snare groove. It's like little placements of the hats and everything. Trying to take out a couple of bits to just make it whip more. It's got to whip. Whip, 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 whip.
And after this point, he creates a couple of ear candies to make it even more groovier. He really adjusts all these tiny details, velocities, to get everything glued together and create a nice groove. Talking about using returns and using parallel chains.
The other thing worth mentioning, I guess, is like on the drums especially. I'll use two sends actually. I'll use like a room send, and it's just like an Ableton reverb, like 2.5 seconds, and the low end's taken out, and it's sidechained a bit. It's pretty simple. But I think if you send everything to one room, it sounds like the music's all kind of together rather than like putting individual reverbs on each channel. And then the other send that I usually use is like a bit of distortion and compression. So the drums are being sent to like a tube warmer kind of that's like driving it a bit and distorting and then compressing it. Essentially parallel compression just done as a send. And it makes a really, really big difference, especially with getting your track to be like sort of competitive on a loudness level, like without it. And then yeah, totally. It's a big difference and it's not really adding that much headroom just because it's so compressed. Barely even hitting -18 and the drums are hitting like -4 or 5.
Yeah, so it just thickens it up.
It's thickening it up, it's providing extra high end. The low end's taken out too. I usually cut like 100 hertz or so. So, because otherwise it's just like the level's going way up. And like what I'll do with that is I'll play the main drum loop and then I'll just adjust this like by hand so it's like at the right level. And then I'll leave it there and I won't touch it.
What is the role of the social media in a producer's life?
I'm trying to project a dream world, so to speak, with the music that I produce. And I believe that the social media should be part of that experience. In hindsight, these days, digital music doesn't have the album cover that we had back in the days. Like when you bought a record, you'd have the album cover to stare at and be inspired by. And in my opinion, I believe that social media should be the replacement of that album cover and the art that goes with that.
Talks about memorable hooks and fooling the listeners.
Just for anyone who doesn't know the track, I'll give you a little play of it.
It's another life. It's another life.
Sort of constant ostinato, just a sort of repeating phrase that doesn't sort of move around in key or sort of melodic content too much. So it's really, really simple, just 4 or 5 notes. This part. So you can see there's not really much to it. I mean, it's barely a melody really, you know, it's just a little sequence. by keeping that pretty simple, it was, it makes it a more memorable hook. If you do these big, fancy, really, really complicated riffs and patterns, they don't really stick in your head. If you think of the tracks in history that the ones that, really get in your head, they're usually 4 or 5 note, simple little riffs on the whole. The only sort of interesting part is this little pitch bend here. So just on that second to last note, there's just a little pitch bend. I think it's only 2 semitones or something. It's just got that little, little downward dive on it. What I really want to talk about is how the melodic parts interact with each other, which is this part. So even though the main riff doesn't move around, it kind of feels like it is. So by having that bass note playing a simple but moving pattern underneath it, it actually makes the riff feel like it's moving. So when that lower note comes in, it almost feels like the riff's changed when it actually isn't. It's just keeping the same sort of ostinato going and then moving other parts around it. So that's kind of a way you can make things feel like they're more musically complex than they are without overcrowding things.
On the hottest topic of electronic music production.
I don't like saturation in the low end too much. So what I try to do is to keep the sounds as clear as possible, not fiddling around with frequencies too much. I would put a little bit of low end, something like 50 Hertz plus 2, maybe shorten it a tiny bit. I like it. I like it. The trick is to mix it right. If I add up a bass here, I would take care not to use the same frequency. I very often use percussive basses, which means it's easier to place it in between the bass drum. Actually, that's the trick. If you put a bass on top of the bass drum, no chance. You will never get to mix it. If you would use the sound which is on top of the bass drum, either the volume has to be very low or the frequency has to be much higher, and then it might be clever not to use octave up, but to use something in between so the frequencies don't add up too easily. For example, frequency separation is very important. Yes, of course, I very often do sidechain compression. Yeah, maybe I can show it right now, right here, right now, right here, right now. I should have done that one. Okay, this one has an output of -12. Altogether, we go to -0.8. You already see this added tom-toms only add up -0.2 dB. If I would switch them off, we go to the -1. But to do it even further, to reduce it even more, I do a sidechain compression. I gained -0.2. That was a very basic, but that's the work. That's mixing. Anything you do, you check your master out, because that's the truth. The truth is in the master out.
Yeah!